Hi folks, it's me Henna. Hey! Hot water is ready. You know what that means? It's time for Henna's matcha green tea latte. Yeah. Matcha green tea. I think I am just going to put like, how about that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, that's it. Okay, now hot water. I'm going to put just a little bit like that. Just a little bit. Just to dissolve it, you know. And then I am going to put some sugar. Henna's approximation. Approximately 3 teaspoons of sugar. Henna's sexy soy milk. Nice and cool. Okay, here. Ah, come on, you can make it. Aw, almost there. Okay. I'm going to add some more soy milk. Healthy stuff. Healthy stuff. Phytoestrogens. Yeah. I should probably stir it the sexy way. Is it turning you on? Now, this is my favorite part of this preparation. Teaspoon goes into the dishwasher. Then, oh, ooey gooey, yeah. Ooey gooey, yeah. Okay, I am going to change my glasses. I'll be right back. There, much better. The Henna that you are familiar with. Yeah. Another sip of matcha green tea latte. Ooh. Instant gratification. Yeah. I'm gonna adjust the camera a little bit. This way you can see what I'm wearing. A short little mini skirt. Yeah. Okay, so have you ever had any fantasies? Like, you know, a wish of a certain superpower. Superpower. Like how Superman had superpowers, how Spider-Man had superpowers, how, well, Catwoman doesn't count, but Supergirl counts. Yes, Supergirl had superpowers. If you were to have a superpower, what superpower would you want to have? I mean, think about it a little bit. Like, what superpower would you want to have, and why? Right? Right. When I was in my Henry days, back in 2012, I knew that my gender dysphoria had reached a point where I'd have to transition pretty soon. But at that point, I was pretty well established as a man, and I had a job that's a pretty reputable job, an engineering job, a respectable, reputable job. On top of that, I had been promoted at work, so I had become a senior engineer, and I was pretty good at what I was doing at the time. And my team and my clients alike had become quite comfortable with me to a point of becoming even more so dependent on me, on my skills, than ever before. In the US, the population at the time was approximately 300 million people, but then to me, my job involved traveling and covering half of the country, essentially, the US. And in that kind of an environment, I was feeling like the whole world knew me. To add to that, when I was traveling through the Los Angeles International Airport one day, LAX, which is a huge, messy, disorganized airport. But anyways, back then, one day at LAX, one of the TSA agents, she was just passing by, in the terminal, and she yells from across the terminal, "Henry, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then I was like, oh, she knew me by name. How could she know me by name?
And then I was thinking like, okay, maybe they had a huge, interdepartmental, police flyer, saying, do not give this man coffee, that kind of thing. And then his name is Henry, description, he wears this brown jacket with like worker jeans and Oxfords. Maybe Skechers, maybe Doc Martens. He's got a nice, neat, short haircut and clean shaven, and he looks very sexy. Yeah, well, maybe not the sexy part, but I added that. That was just what I was assuming. All right, maybe they didn't have a flyer. Maybe that one agent just knew me by name.
Yeah, so that added to the effect that I was feeling that the whole world was knowing me by name. Well, and then on top of that, the Starbucks that I was visiting at that terminal, the barista, one day she saw me in line, and when it got to my turn, she just brought out my chai with soy milk and toasted bagel with cream cheese. And she's like, okay, that'll be this much. And my order was already ready. So I was like, how did you know my order? And she was like, that's what you had always ordered over the last 3 years. And I was like, really? Am I that boring? And then, of course, I had to cover myself. So I said, well, I was thinking about ordering something different today, but since you brought it out, I might as well just accept this order again. And she's like, sure. So, yeah. So that kind of thing. Okay. Going back to the superpower. Fast forward a few weeks. I was like, okay, all right. Mock scenario.
See, because as an engineer, I like to brainstorm and, think of mock scenarios.
So I said, okay, mock scenario. If I were to transition. All right, that sounds really, really kinky.
I don't know why it was sounding really kinky to me at the time, but I was still a guy, remember, at the time, full of testosterone, so anything sexual is kind of like feeling kinky.
So I was like, okay, that's kind of kinky, but that's okay. I am in my own private thoughts.
Yes, private thoughts.
And I had to go lock the doors and stuff and close the window blinds. I don't know, maybe I was feeling that might have helped with further securing my private thoughts. Yeah. So once my apartment was fully secured, I was like, okay, all right, brainstorming. First things first. Well, where do I begin?
Right, first things first. Where do I begin?
And I did not know where to begin. So I said, all right, how about gathering some info? Time for Henry's reconnaissance mission. Time for some data gathering. Yeah. So I did some intel gathering reconnaissance. Yeah. And what I did was I went online and I was Googling like real life personal transitioning journal entries slash blogs, and I found one. It was about a transgendered woman and her sister. The transgender woman transitioned from a male to being a female, and so did her sister. The journal entry was quite detailed. It took me about a few weeks actually to complete reading the entire publication, online publication, which was really, really nicely detailed and really cool. I appreciated that information. I had learned a specific path of transitioning, right? A single specific path of transitioning. So here's the thing, in transitioning, actually in the world in general, as the old saying goes, to each its own. Yeah. So in transitioning, what works for a person might not work for another person. What worked for me might not work for you. Yeah.
Some of the reasons being preferences, priorities, circumstances, situations, genetic differences, health reasons,
So, but then that journal entry showed me a specific path. And I was like, okay, that path sounded pretty reasonable, pretty straightforward and logical and systematic. And so I was like, cool. Then I proceeded to looking things up, and I found a YouTube video blog of a transgendered woman, and I actually subscribed to her channel for pretty much like easily into 2021. And then finally she was like, okay, she's not doing that anymore, so she's moved on with the YouTube blog. So I was like, okay, fine, you know. I kept the subscription for a little bit, but then I was like, all right, I need to move on with myself as well. So I am unsubscribed to her channel. And yeah, that channel was pretty informational, except her style, her path was like quite different from mine. And then I found another video blogger on YouTube. Hers was different from mine and different from hers, and different from that web journal entry. So I was like, wow, there's more than one way to transition. But then at that time, I wasn't really like involved in the transgender community, or even the LGBTQ community. I was like still thinking of myself as a straight guy, and then I was like, okay, I've got better things to do, that kind of thing. But if you are transitioning, it's good to go and participate, you know, in those transgendered events and stuff. It's good, it's informational, and also it can relieve some anxieties. Yeah. Transitioning anxieties, yeah. I don't know about you, but in my case, it helped me relieve some transitioning anxieties, yeah.
That's before I met a bunch of toxic people there, and then that's a different story, but that's okay. That's not a part of this video, so there.
So where was I? The pathways, right? Right. And then I eventually found a path that could work out for me. And then I took that path, and it was a very carefully planned, like I had carefully planned the path, like step by step. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. Going back to the wish thing. I was like, okay, where do I begin? And then I suddenly found myself wishing that I had the power to just transition from being a man to being a woman, just like that, overnight. And I kind of divulged, you know, myself in that fantasy, and then did some Googling, and I found this story about some like chamber, you know, a fictional chamber where the guy goes in and then starts growing breasts, and then his little pecker, you know, transformed and stuff, and then he comes out a woman. And I was like, wow, that's so cool, you know, it would be so cool to have something like that. And that way I wouldn't have to worry about like being in the in-between stages, you know, at work and stuff. So but then the reality kind of like hit me, and I was like, okay, reality check, that chamber doesn't exist, and transitioning doesn't seem to work that way, at least not that I'm aware of at the time. And so, yeah, I know there are a lot of transgendered folks out there who are right now in the stage that I was in at the time. And they're trying to figure out what to do. Maybe you are trying to figure out what to do and you're trying to transition. Last thing you want to do is to go on like all these popularity boards, you know, that's what I like to call it, popularity boards. Like, you know, message boards, you know, out there. It doesn't matter if it is a general message board or an LGBTQ message board, it's a message board. From my own personal experiences as an engineer, if I were to go to a message board, like many of my experiences going to message boards to find information, it really required me to really know the topic in order to ask on the message board. So that's kind of like counterintuitive, right? I mean, if I knew the topic, why would I be asking? Well, here's the thing. To simply ask, like, for example, let's pick something. Let's pick something that just about anybody can relate to. What can I pick? What can I pick? How to prepare matcha green tea latte. Talk about which. I'm having a matcha stash. Yes, matcha stash. Okay, so matcha green tea latte. I don't think everybody knows how to prepare matcha green tea latte, but I guess we could pretend that it's preparing coffee. Kind of like coffee, right? Right. So, that's a good example. Okay. Let's say you know how to prepare coffee, and I know how to prepare coffee, but I want to know how to prepare matcha green tea latte. So the concept is very similar. I'm talking instant coffee. Instant coffee, water, sugar or sweetener to flavor, and then milk, right? Optionally. All right, matcha green tea latte. Matcha green tea mix, water, sugar, sweetener, and then milk. Very similar, right? Right. So, knowing how to prepare coffee, I could go to a message board and I could ask, how do I prepare matcha green tea latte? And if one of the answers goes, add ice and then add green tea powder, add milk and stir, I would know, like my warning lights would go off saying that reply I could discard because that person is just probably just BSing me, because I'd know that if I were to put instant coffee on ice, it's not going to dissolve well to begin with. Similar in concept, the matcha green tea powder, if using powder, would have to dissolve first in a small amount, and then maybe ice can come afterwards. And then added water maybe later, or maybe water comes afterwards, added ice later, or milk and stuff. But first the powder would need to be dissolved, that kind of thing, right? Right. So with transgenderism, that's kind of similar. Going to message boards for somebody who is completely new to the transitioning process, it can be a very bad idea, very unwise, because then, as I was mentioning earlier, to each its own. What works for me might not work for you, and vice versa. And my preferences might not be the same as yours. So now if you have like one person saying that, one person who had successfully transitioned from start to finish saying that, then okay, that's one pathway that was successful. But then if you're brand new, you're still figuring out what to do. So if you start listening to person A, and then midway you listen to person B, and then person C, now it's all a hodgepodge of instructions, right? Right. And you try to do any of those things, you're probably not going to proceed quite well in terms of your own transitioning, right? Right. So, yeah, that's pretty much like one of the reasons for my posting this video. It's kind of like a bit of a word of caution kind of thing, and a bit of like a what to look out for, that kind of thing, and what things to keep in mind, that kind of thing, kind of video. So yeah, okay, now for the reality stuff. Yeah, so transitioning is transitioning, right. The big picture is transitioning from, in my case, male to female. This video is based on my own personal experiences, so it's based on the male to female transitioning path. And yeah, my personal transitioning path, yours might be different from mine, and that's cool. Yeah. So transitioning, the big picture of it is transitioning from being a male to being a female. Pretty simple stuff, right? In concept, at least. But then the pathways, I mentioned different pathways. Well, what did I mean by that? In my case, I liked to, I guess it's partly because of my engineering background. I like to do things like in a way that is like, and also my stick shift driving background.
Since I got my driver license back in the early 90s, yep.
So, yeah, so with stick shift, in order to shift to another gear, I'd have to match the RPMs. In the case of Star, it's more like 3,500 RPM, and then I could I could shift up to second gear and drop the RPM to about 2,000 RPM. So I could be like, roar, and then I'd be like, okay, clutch, and then it drops, shifts, and then clutch. By the time the clutch re-engages, it's at just the right engine speed at the right timing, and the shift goes really, really smooth. Yeah. Now, as an engineer, I might have a client using a machine, for example, and I want to do field upgrade, for example. Well, I could just go to the machine and start tearing things down, and I could be like, okay, all right, now we tweak this, we adjust this, and be all unprofessional about it. Or I could plan ahead of time and say, all right, this is going to take about 4 hours, or 6 hours, or 2 days, or a week. And thoroughly understand the customer's machine set up, and then I could then plan the upgrade outside of the machine, and then go in all prepared, and then implement the field upgrade. Once it's done, outside of the machine, well, might still look the same. The workflow, for the client, there might be hardly any changes, but there's a field upgrade that was already done, but the client didn't lose any of the workflows, right? It's very smooth in terms of like transitioning. Yeah, in terms of my own transitioning, I like to take that kind of approach. So, as a guy, I had a job, a reputable job, but then I've got things that I need to do before I start dressing up and transitioning as a woman. So I started off with hair removal. Yes, hair removal. I also consulted my amazing and caring hormone specialist, started my hormones, right? And this wasn't back in 2012 anymore. This was back in like 2019 now. So 2019, I was doing hair removal. At the same time, I was starting hormones. But then I didn't transition at work. I was already getting hormones and already doing hair removal. But I was still staying as a guy, right? And then I prepared the hardware, the external appearance, to a point where, like, hair is like having a 5 o'clock shadow. It's really noticeable. Without hair, it felt better to me. So that's what I did, hair removal. And then while I was like in the process of my hair removal, I came out at work. But I didn't come out at work to my my employer first. I actually came out to my clients first. So I kind of like was establishing the baseline, right? So baseline's established, everything else, like the beard, is going away, and I could see for a fact that the beard and the body hair all over can actually be gone for a fact. And I was like, okay, this can actually happen, being like hair free as a woman. And so then it's like better, like a better footing kind of thing, right? Establishing little bases, and then client, and then external appearance, external appearance and stuff. And then I came out at work, and by then I was like, okay, I've come out at work, so it is time to actually shift into gear. And this might be a little tough tough stage of the transitioning process. I've set it up to be as smooth as I could, but then this is one of those moments where it's a little bit tough, right? So I came out at work, and then afterwards, the uniforms. I switched into wearing women's uniforms, and I just at that point I was fully out, and I was like, all right, the cat is out of the bag, and the cat doesn't want to go back into the bag anymore, so might as well just go forward. Yeah, so that's pretty much what I did. All right, that's just the physical part of the pathway, right? Just the physical part. Okay, so physically, okay, that sounds pretty simple, but then how about hormones-wise? So hormones-wise, during my intel gathering attempts, I had learned that there were 4 kinds of hormones available. One's injection, another is oral, another is skin patches, and another is rectally. Yes, rectally.
Rectally kind of sounded a little bit gross, but that was an option.
But when I met my amazing hormone specialist for the first time, I learned the fifth option, which was pellets. Yes, pellets. You heard right, pellets. I was like, what's a pellet? I learned from her about pellets being something that is inserted through a small incision, and I'd say preferably by a licensed healthcare provider. So the nice thing about pellets is, okay, so if we're talking about injections, right? Injections, for example, estrogen, estradiol, the hormone spikes after injections, and then it might come down over a period of 1 week to 2 weeks, and then once it goes down, then another injection. Every 1 or 2 weeks, there's another injection. Spike. That didn't make sense to me. 1, I was deadly afraid of needles, and 2 was that anything, if we want to achieve something, we don't push it a little bit and then go back again, push a little bit and go back again. If I want this pen, this is my little purse, makeup purse. If I want to move this pen from this side to this side, I don't just move this pen so that it can slide back down. I don't just push it a little bit so that it can slide back down. Push it a little bit so that it can slide back down. It's just why even bother, right? For a cisgendered woman, that might make sense. For a postmenopausal cisgendered woman, because the body, everything, is already female. It's just a matter of, boosting the levels of estrogen, and that might make sense for a cisgendered woman. But for a transgendered woman transitioning from a guy physique to a woman physique, well, pushing it a little bit and then letting it slide back down, pushing it a little bit and letting it slide back down, it didn't really compute in my engineering brain. Yeah, so I was like, all right, I do not want needles. That's one thing I know. The other option was oral. Oral, I was reading that, there were a lot of health risks involved. And there's a lot of like stress on the organs. And so I was like, all right, I don't want to, put my organs through unnecessary stress. So that's kind of like, maybe I don't want that option either. And then the patch option. The patch option sounded really nice to me. But then at the same time, I remembered, okay, when I take a shower, I like to shower like a hippopotamus. So the patch might not last even a single shower, and things might get pretty expensive. A patch every day, the kind of thing. So I was like, all right, maybe a patch might not be a good idea. And besides, sometimes I might be in a pretty warm machine room, and whatever's on my body, might have to be rubbed off or washed off, after work and stuff. And so at the time, at least. So I was like, all right, maybe the patch option might not be so preferable. And then I was thinking, okay, the anal option. I said, So, but when I thought about the pellet option, it made a lot of sense to me. I was like, all right. And then I learned about the pellet options being like different from the injection option in that, yes, the pellet needs to be inserted by a qualified healthcare provider, right? Like my amazing hormone specialist is inserted under the skin, right? And then after about a couple of days, the area of insertion heals up.
And then the body's like, ding! There is a supply of estrogen sitting in that section of the body.
And then the body's like, okay, if I need estrogen, I know where to go. So the body kind of absorbs the pellets as needed. And if the body doesn't need the pellets, then the body doesn't really absorb the pellets. So one insertion might be a little bit expensive up front. In my case, it has lasted anywhere from 4 to as long as 8 months. Yeah. So, which is really cool because now what using the pellets does is it essentially gives the body a natural reservoir of, in my case, estrogen supply.
It could be estrogen, it could be progesterone, it could be some other medicine, but in my case, estrogen, estradiol,
and it just sits there and the body can absorb as needed. So the model changes from being forcing estrogen into the body into being like, okay, hey body, there's estrogen here, go ahead and consume as needed, that kind of thing. So having a supply is like having gas in the car. The gas is just in the gas tank, but the engine uses the gasoline as needed. So now there's this like hypothetically a constant supply as needed up to so many months, right? So which was what I decided to get, estrogen in the form of pellets, and which ended up working real well for me. As you may have seen some of my time-lapse videos, up to about 24 months, I was like, nothing is changing, and then 24 months, I think month 24 was like the turning point. And suddenly, like, the body's like, okay,
Maybe my body is like an engineer body, so my body thinks like me. My body is part of me. Anyways, maybe my body was like, okay, configuration ready to implement changes.
Pretty much, like, within a few weeks, I just changed. I started noticing like changes like almost every day. And then it's not just the body, it's also the wiring up there as well. And it was an amazing feeling, both in appearance and also physiologically, right? And then that included breast development and stuff, and then Mr. Wiggles, was shrinking and stuff. So that's one thing I wanted to mention in this video that I have mentioned in this video. Keep your options open. Of course, if your body's not used to taking like progesterone, a lot of progesterone, because progesterone can cause some straining symptoms. So in my case, I had some adverse reactions switching from oral progesterones to the pellet progesterones. So now I've gone back to using oral progesterones, and for the estradiol I'm using pellets. Yep. So talk to your doctor. This is not advice or suggestions. It's just something that I'm mentioning here, based on what I did. Right. So for your own transitioning, talk directly to a doctor. Stay away from message boards. Maybe just for fun, it's okay, just go there for fun and whatever you do, out there. But for actually getting serious information that's like critical to the transitioning process, well, message boards I would not recommend at all. Yep. Okay, so the approach to physical transitioning. What I'm talking about is this. I've mentioned like different hormones delivery methods, right? So now he'll be like, okay, Henna, so now I'm taking injections right now, and I'm not seeing much changes. I've been on injections for 2 years already, and I'm not seeing much changes. But in your videos, you're showing me your changes after 2 years, and that's like really significant changes. Why? Well, remember this little prompt?
Injection, body development goes back down. Injection, body development goes back down. You're a smart person. You can put 2 and 2 together, hopefully.
So you can do that 2 years, you can do that 10 years, you can do that 100 years. Well, you might not see the changes. Okay, so keep in mind that point for now. Now, somebody who's been taking injections for about a year, and then she goes to a message board going like, I'm not seeing any changes. How soon would I see any changes? And then somebody who has been on injections for 2 years and not having seen much changes herself might say, yeah, if you've been on hormones for a year and you're not seeing any changes, you probably might not see any changes in 2 years. It's a pretty valid, statement, but based on that person's own personal experience, because that person's been using injections, and that person's telling a person using injections about that. So it's not like, that person that's answering on the message board is lying or anything. It's just that that person was on injections, and it's just that was like that person's experience. So now the same message board, the same person, right? The same person who's responding on the message board. So if I were to go on the message board, the same message board, and I was in my first year of my pellets, remember, that person who was asking just now was on injections. I'm on pellets. And if I were to ask, I've been a year into using pellets, estrogen pellets, and I'm not seeing any changes. Can I expect changes in the near future? And the person on the message board who's been on injections might be like, well, if you've been on hormones for a year and you're not seeing any changes, you probably won't see any changes. Well, now, I just told you in this video, and you could watch at some of my time-lapse videos. In my case, it was 2 years was my magical point where I suddenly started transforming. So if I were to listen to that person, on the message board about that 1 year mark and not expecting any more changes, well, then would I have been wise to listen to that person, right? Right. So it's not that that person was trying to cause harm to me or had malintentions towards me, but it's just that it's like apples and oranges speaking, right? Right. The methods are different and the results are different. So in my case, I just made my own calculations. I made my own research. I gathered my own information, and I had a game plan. I set it, I scheduled it, everything. And I had a very organized journal entry, week by week, that I was keeping. And the video journal on this channel is one of my journals. So even if I were to talk to the person for real on that message board, I'd be like, okay, so that's your experience. I don't have to argue with that person. And I could just be like, okay, what kind of hormones are you taking? Are you taking shots? Are you taking patches? Whatever, what's your lifestyle like? I could, if I started knowing that person well enough, I could ask that. And if the person is like, oh, I sit in front of the computer 24/7, just programming, well, then that might not be similar to what I might be doing. In my case, I was working with heavy machinery at the time, and it's a lot of physical work, climbing up the steps, coming down and everything, twisting, turning, and then there's like really fine, delicate work, and then there's big work and stuff, and then there's lots of going through schematics and wiring diagrams, like big rolls of like schematics, just like from like Indiana Jones movies, you know, just
Rawr, here's the scroll, and then rawr, and there's a schematic.
and then going through the schematic and diagrams and stuff, calculating a bunch of calculations, a bunch of like, yeah, there's a lot of principles involved in the line of work that I was doing at the time. So there's a lot of physical like activity, right? So that might not be a match for me. That kind of thing. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is understand why you're using a specific method, understand the pros and cons of the specific method, and understand well what to expect out of that specific method. And once you understand those things, then you can go out and gather information from other different methods, but then you don't have to be like, oh, that person says after 1 year there's no more changes. That person says, oh wait, Henna's video is showing changes after 24 months. What do I believe? Instead of being lost like that, it's better to understand things, understand the details yourself, whys, the whats and stuff, and choosing the method properly and logically. Right. So yeah, a pellet method has been working well for me. Hormones take time, and in my engineering brain I was like, okay, pellets, now the reservoir is sitting. There were other changes that I had done to my lifestyle as well, including my eating habits, and I was watching what I was putting into my body so that they would have like minimal impact to the hormones, right? So that they could help the hormones transition my body further and not go against the hormones, right, that kind of thing. In my case, I already had my understanding that hormones could take up to 5 years to help produce like visibly noticeable changes. So that was my expected timeline. But when 24 months happened and I started changing, it was a pleasant surprise, right? Please let me know in the comment section below your opinions, feedback, suggestions, and of course, if you figured out the superpower that you're wanting to have, then you're welcome to mention that in the comment section below. And don't forget to also mention the why, if you want to mention the why. I'd be curious to know. Laters.